All right. Hi, everybody. This is your professor here. I'm very excited to welcome Adriana Beltrame dos Santos Keller, who is here to talk to us all about astrology, which is really popular in the United States as this kind of fascinating combination of mythology and psychology and spirituality and science. So welcome, Adriana. Yay! Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Natalie. So my name is Adriana, that very long name, Adriana blah, 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 blah Keller. And I'm from Brazil. And I've been here in the US for the past 5 years or so. I came here to study my master's in East-West psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about astrology and the connections to mythology and some other things also that relate to the whole scope of the world of astrology. And I'll talk a little bit about myself here already. So I started working with astrology, I missed how many years I have already started, but I think it's been something around 8 years at this point. And I had a big crisis in my life. I wanted to do some soul searching, and I left my job and stopped doing everything that I was doing. I was just interested in reading books about astrology. And then eventually I had an astrologer kind of guiding me through the world of astrology and helping me to be introduced to the language, to how to interpret things. And it was a very special moment to have this person helping me. So I feel very blessed that I had that, and not everyone has a guide like that. But nowadays, since you have so much information available online about astrology, because I think astrology is one of the fields of study that you can find a lot of things for free online and very accessible. So you can still do that even if you don't have a guide, but I recommend always having someone who actually practices it and sees people. So then you can have like a richer discussion and actually consider people, because it's not just about studying, oh, the planets mean this and that or so. You have to know how to communicate that with people and how to have them benefit from having a chart reading, for example, because not every astrology that works in the field actually does chart reading for people. Some people actually work with politics, with like predictions of global happenings. So you don't necessarily have to work one-on-one with people, but I would say that it really helps to understand things deeper. So because of that, after studying for a little while, in a like half taught, self-taught way and half being guided gently and subtly by this mentor. I say that because he would just show up every now and then and send me some text like, this book in the library, page number 5, go there and there is information there for you. So this is how he was guiding me. I had no idea, and then he would disappear. So he wouldn't tell me why. And I would go there very curious and read about it, and he would definitely explain some important things that were happening, not only in my life, but generally with the collective. So I knew that his guidance was really powerful and rich, but also I couldn't ask much questions. There was no way that I could follow up on him because he would disappear. So that's how it happened with me. And I hope that you feel curious about everything that I have to say today. And if you feel interested, it's not that hard to actually start. It's just a matter of starting. So there are some additional subjects that can be really helpful in the studies and in the understanding of astrology, which are, some of them are the ones that I pointed here. There are more, of course, because every time that you're working with a human being, it requires a sort of like holistic or integral understanding of different possibilities of different fields, so you can actually communicate and get to a point where people can be impacted in an effective way. So symbolism is kind of like a subject that helps you understand what the symbols mean. And once you're able to get that faculty going of interpreting different symbols, you become a little more savvy with looking to symbols and making meaning of them and combining them together and communicating about them. So for example, I don't have my cards here, but there are some symbols that are connected to the planet, for example. So if you see sometimes the symbol of Mars, which is like a circle and a little arrow coming out of it, a lot of people are going to see that and they're going to recognize that it's connected to the planet Mars or the idea of masculinity. So sometimes it's important to, you know, have like a quick way of interpreting symbols so you can interpret them all together, especially in a chart reading. So another one is the idea of the archetypes, which comes from that psychology and mainly from the work of Jung. And he was actually an apprentice of Freud, who was the very first, I think, famous psychologist in like the Western world. And after working with him, because Freud was very like intellectual, he would talk a lot about just like interpretation of reason. And Jung noticed that there could be a path of working with dreams, with different symbols, and the more subtle things that kind of travel around the psyche. So one of the terms that he started to use was the idea of archetypes. And archetypes are also symbols in a way, but they mean like general collective ideas that are shared no matter what culture you're from. So for example, if we think about the idea of a mother, everyone knows more or less what is this like idea behind what a mother means. So there's this figure that gives birth, that like protects and nurtures something new until this something new, if it's a person, is able to live on its own, right? So cross-culturally, everyone is going to understand what the idea of mother is. So this one is a very direct one, a very direct archetype. But we can also talk about different archetypes, like the archetypes of the hero. So if you think about people that have a tendency of actually going for the fight and saving the world and doing something meaningful that actually does impact, so that person can be living through the archetype of the hero. So these are some examples of that. I'm going to talk a little more about it, so I hope we can get a deeper understanding as we go. Mythology, right, which is a very ancient theme that brings a lot of different stories, like narrating different times and different phases of each culture, right? So there are like all the different cultures, they have like those sacred texts sometimes, and all these stories there, they go to try to understand like what is the story behind the creation of the world, for example. Or we can think about Greek mythology, when we hear about all those gods and heroes of Prometheus, or you name it. Some of them are more famous and some are not that much, but mythology is also very connected to astrology, because most of the planets and most of the, even the asteroids that you look in someone's chart, their very names are connected to mythological beings. So knowing the story of that very mythological being is also going to help you understand the meaning of a planet. psychology, of course, because it's important to understand the depth of the human psyche and how people process emotions and how that might be pointed in someone's chart. And then another one that I think is very important, and not a lot of people talk about that in connection to astrology, which is meditation and the silence of the mind, because it's very important to kind of reach a level in which you're able to access a deeper understanding that is not just rational or logical. It's actually embodied. You can have your intuition working with you at the same time that your mind is interpreting facts and information. So the moment that you're able to silence your mind a little bit and stay in this kind of state that you're able to receive intuitive information at the same time that you are communicating with someone about something very concrete, can help you achieve a better, not only a better connection, but a better understanding of what is at stake in someone's life. Because mainly, if you start practicing it, you might notice that when someone comes to have a chart reading, sometimes it can be for fun or out of curiosity, but I would say that 90% of the times is because the person is either in a crisis or have someone has a really big decision to make, or they are at a crossroads. Something is happening that is making them do it. It's really rare when someone's just, I'm gonna do it because I'm gonna do it. So it's important to kind of reach a meditative state where you can actually help the person see their own guidance inside themselves, but also be yourself the voice of whatever guidance they might be needing in that moment.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to interject really quickly, sorry, because I think this is really important. It speaks to why anthropologists are interested in studying a subject like astrology, because as it's pretty clear based on what you're breaking down, astrology is an interesting system for people to make meaning of their personality, of their lives, of their love relationships. And it's got these kind of fascinating aspects of various other religious practices, but also healing practices that are very ancient. And what's fascinating is that in this kind of ultra scientific world that we live in, still everybody knows what their sign is. Still everybody, might have an idea of having read their horoscope at some point in time. So it's a really fascinating example of a very large subculture that is just beneath the surface of cultures like the United States, which again, we heavily rely on science, but we still have these kinds of other ways for answering large questions in our life. And astrology is even more popular today and kind of comes in waves, right? The 1960s, it comes back in a big way, but it's also having another moment here, particularly in the queer community as well, right? There's a lot, it's very popular in queer communities and trans communities as well. It's sort of a mechanism for self-guidance and healing and answering questions. But I just really want to kind of speak to that because you're really opening that up with this discussion. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a very good point, because in nowadays world, it became a tool for like self-discovery, right? Self-knowledge, for understanding one's own depth. But at the very beginning of it, it was a very sacred thing. So especially in the East, because you have different forms of astrology, right? You have Western astrology and you have Eastern astrology. And in India, for example, the Vedic astrology, there is a different relationship to how people go for it. Like it's like usually when someone is gonna like get married, when a child is gonna get born, it's kind of like a traditional practice that every family will go to because it's part of their tradition and part of their connection to the sacred, which is a little different than what happens here, because in the Western world, it is more around like, oh, I want to do that myself for my own individuality. That's the majority of the cases that I've like seen the astrologers, they are the most famous one, talking about their clients, for example. Not to say that they're not like cases, they are maybe looking for something more sacred. So to say, not that like discovery is sacred as well, right? But just like it's a different form of relating, it's a more like individual kind of approach in the West. Yes, next slide, thank you. So just to deepen a little bit into the idea of the archetypes, I'm going to read this quote here that is diving a little more, which is, in some pagan traditions and in cultures all around the world, the word archetype is used to define a model of a person who stands as a symbol of a collection of traits. As an example, a warrior could be considered an archetype of all that is brave and strong and honorable. A priestess might be seen as an archetype of wisdom and intuition. In goddess-centric belief systems, the triune archetype of maiden, mother, and crone is often invoked to represent youth, middle age, and cronehood. So the more you go into that, you see that there are all kinds of possibilities in the world of archetypes that really can help you understand mainly like general patterns that can be repeated in different people's lives. And if someone has a personality that is really connected to a certain archetype, it doesn't mean that this is what they are forever, because a lot of the times we are kind of transitioning to through an archetype in our life. But there's usually like some main themes and some main archetypes that we tend to vibrate in the same kind of pattern. But there's always room for change, of course. So Carl Jung used the system of archetypes to describe images that are related to a collective unconsciousness. He believed that every culture or belief system has common archetypes that everyone could relate to, whether that of the warrior, the priestess, the king, or others. He then carried this theory a step further in describing how archetypes were connected to our inner psyche. So a lot of the times when you do dream interpretation, you're gonna see very clearly archetypes playing out in the unconscious mind. So a lot of the times different people across different cultures, they have dreams about a certain animal. And a lot of the times researchers can connect what was going on in their life, that they all had a dream about the same animal. That means that they were like deeply unconsciously connected to that very pattern that is being represented by the animal that came through the dream. So that's a way that Carl Jung offered to approach the archetype. All right, next slide. Thank you. In mythology, I think is a good tool to really put the archetypes to play together. So you can really understand how the patterns can correlate and how they communicate. So mythology is a field of study that is not easily defined, being as much a composite of many other subjects of human inquisitiveness and investigation as it is a unique arena all its own. Of its own, I think that's a typo. The term mythology is also often applied to the entire body of myths of a given culture. Thus, one may speak of Greek mythology or Polynesian mythology. Some mythologies, usually, though not always, consist of a large number of interrelated stories involving a pantheon of gods and goddesses said to have lived long ago, and most often to have created the world and the first people to have ever lived. Sometimes these gods and goddesses may be said to live even today and to inhabit a sacred location or to be embodied by certain objects or animals. Many interesting theories and conjectures have been put forth, especially in the last 150 years by various students of mythology as to what all this storytelling is about and why virtually every known culture in the world has generated its own system of myths and legends, most sharing a number of themes and ideas which appear to be nearly universal and common to all peoples everywhere. Sorry. yet also each also with countless and intriguing features unique and specific to itself. So in a lot of cultures, their own understanding of life was connected to stories and to this myth. And also, if you think about the indigenous natives, for example, there is the story of the Turtle Island, right, and the creation of the world. And this is a way of understanding why are we here, right? How did everything start? And in the Greek mythology, you have all these gods and goddesses and warriors kind of like really having
Oops, looks like we froze for a minute there. Let me pause the recording here. Back. We had a little technical glitch there. Just wanted to have a concluding statement just to note with mythology that every single religion in the world has mythology, and myths are explanatory models for existence, whether it is why humans are here or where we come from, or even something basic like where the mountain comes from or where the trees come from. Myths and stories are really important to every religion. And so they're also very important in our understanding of ourselves, which is sort of where that comes into astrology, right? Myth making and archetypes come together to explain personality, to explain hardship, and to give context for existence.
Perfect. So in the light of all of that, what is actually astrology? You can go to the next slide. So easy discovering the will of the gods. Is it magic? Is it a thing to predict the future? Is it science? Is it non-science? Combination of archetypal and mythological ideas applied to individuals' lives, maybe? A system, a method for the understanding of human qualities, the natural and collective rhythms. I would say all of that. All of that is a possibility. And a lot of people might be afraid of it because it is used oftentimes for the prediction of the future and to try to see what's going to happen in the world or in someone's life. And that can be really scary, right? Especially when it brings the sensation of like being fated to a specific or certain happenings and feeling like you have no way out of that. So that brings a lot of fear. And in fact, that is not the case, because in astrology, there are a lot of elements to be interpreted. And if you go to different astrologers, you might have different interpretations, even though your birth chart is always the same, because each person has their own reading of the symbols and of the archetypes and the connection with what is happening in your life. So there is always a possibility of having, like, guessing what is like the potential happening here with this information, right? So in that case, it can be really connected to science when science is trying to discover something new, when you don't have enough data yet, when you don't have enough information to assure something 100% that this is what is happening. You have to go to different information and piece them together in order to kind of have an idea of like, it's likely that it's going in this direction, right? So you can definitely use astrology in this way. And when it comes to the conversation of is it science, is it not science, at the very beginning of everything, astrophysics and astrology, they were all the same in one. They were all connected. So in the very beginning of it, there was no separation between the more subjective reading of the planets and the very like physical quantum interpretation of the very scientific way of going about it. It was after, it was in a period that all the subjects were divided and separated, that astrology was kind of like fell into this place of, oh, this is maybe just mysticism. This is, let's leave it for the occult, for whoever wants to study the subjective things, and let's separate science, and astrophysics is what is that really matters right now. And then the scientists, stayed with astrophysics, and then the people who were maybe the witches or the wizards, they were working with the astrological part of the knowledge. But at the beginning, it was all in one.
Right. And to interject quickly, that was part of the Age of Enlightenment, right? So that was kind of this urge of rationality. In the starting in about the Renaissance era, they started to build more and more of this notion that science and spirituality should be separate things. But what's interesting about astrology is that astrology and astronomy branched off. But what's interesting about astrology, it's using objective observation with subjective interpretation. And that's kind of where it is today, right? So you can objectively watch and track and chart the stars and use mathematics to predict these models. But what's subjective is the interpretation of what that means, right? Whereas astronomy doesn't really project any interpretation on it. It's more just about theories of existence about the stars themselves, and not how those may or may not have an impact on humans on this earth, right? And that's really what separates the two, is that astrologers are more interested in the interaction of the planets with human life, whereas astronomers there's no interaction there, besides like the Big Bang and these kinds of, the fact that, humans are made up of the same materials that stars are. Beyond that, they kind of don't have this kind of interaction in that science.
Yeah, perfect. And within astrology, you're actually working with the natural rhythms that are actually happening in the sky. So you're looking to objective things, but you're bringing this piece of the subjectivity together. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So every astrologer is gonna talk about what astrology is in a different way. And that is like a really interesting thing that I enjoy about it, is that it has room for a lot of unique creativity from each researcher and each astrologer. You can always name it in the way that, because it's so subjective, in a way that that portrays better your own vision and your own perspectives and your own relationship to that knowledge, right? So one of the biggest websites, and one of the very first ones that became famous, is called Astrodingst. And there are some of the most famous astrologers work and write essays and articles and things. And this is where I drew it from. So in the website, if you go there, you're going to read that. They're going to say that astrology sees mankind as being not only influenced by hereditary factors and the environment, but also by the state of our solar system and the moment of birth. The planets are regarded as basic life forces, the tools we live by, as well as the basis of our very substance. These planetary forces take on different forms depending on their zodiacal positions and on the way they relate to one another. The aspects formed between the planets describe these relationships. The positions of the planets in relation to the place of birth tell us their expression in the spheres of life depicted by the astrological houses. By interpreting the roles of these players, the planets, and their qualities, the elements, the signs, and the houses, in creating a synthesis, astrology is able to present a complete and comprehensive picture of the person and his potential based on the natal horoscope. So here you're going to see some technical terms being used, right? Elements, signs, and houses. I'm going to talk a little better about it once I show an actual chart so we can see what this all means. And this famous astrologer who also writes for this website, his name is Robert Hand. He's been there for a long time in the field. And he says that traditional forms of astrology derived from the Middle Eastern traditions, which include Hellenistic, Geotish, and medieval astrology, both in Arabic and Latin. So the Geotish here is the actual Vedic astrology that comes from the Vedas and is practiced nowadays, practiced in India. So there is a combination between Western and Eastern research and interpretation. Yes, we can go to the next one. So here, just to understand a little deeper, every time you talk about a sign, you're going to be referring to the zodiac, right? So we usually talk about 12 main signs. There are the 12 big archetypes of the zodiac. And it starts with Aries and it ends with Pisces. And it goes all the way, and every month of the year, you have a relationship to one of those signs. So every time you say, oh, my sign is Pisces, my sign is Taurus, my sign is Leo, that means that the position of the sun when you were born was actually from the perspective of the earth passing in front or right around that specific constellation and that specific part of the sky. So that actually is the position of the sun every time we talk about a sign. Next slide. So here we can see it a little better. So this wheel is actually the chart itself. And I like to read it as like a pizza. They have a pizza with 12 different pieces. So 12 different slices. And you're gonna see that at the very center, there are numbers from 1 to 12. Each of these numbers represents one slice of the pizza, which is one of the houses of the birth chart or of any chart, because you don't necessarily have to have just a birth chart. You can take a chart of an event. For example, here, the example I'm giving is on the right side, there is my own birth chart, Adriana, and here is like a picture of the sky at the very moment that I was born. But on the left side, we have the chart of today. So today is April 24th, and we started this recording at 10:30 more or less, and this was the chart of that very moment. If a child was being born at that moment, this would be how that child's birth chart will look like, but also you can see that for events and for specific happenings. It doesn't necessarily have to be about birth. And here you're gonna see all the 12 houses, and each of the planets are gonna be positioned in a different house, and they're gonna be placed in a different element, which can be fire, air, water, or earth. And they're gonna be connected to different signs. So it can be Aries, Taurus, Gemini, you name it, from the 12 ones. So all this combination of all this information is what you're gonna be reading about whenever you wanna interpret a chart. Yeah, we can go to next. And so usually what astrologers work with is not only the birth chart of a person, but also the transits of the moment. So usually we are going to be looking to what is happening in the sky right now, and how is this relating to the sky as it was when you were born? What is the communication between them? For example, if you were born with the sun in Pisces, which is my case, every time that the sun goes back to Pisces, that means that my sun is highlighted because the sun is going back to its own home, right? So this is right around the moment of my birthday. So that means that I do get a lot of attention. I kind of feel more in my element. I might have a process of like wanting to see myself and put some light in what I actually am and what's my personality, so I can kind of like maybe develop further from that. So every time you have a transit, kind of like speaking in a specific way with your birth chart, you're gonna have happenings in your life. And not all the time these are like good prospects. For example, the sun is considered like a planet that actually gives light to things. So it brings consciousness and awareness to things. But we have, for example, a planet called Pluto that is connected to crisis and maybe tragedies and big transformations or separations, right? So when that planet is kind of like passing around a part of your chart, for example, if the planet of maybe Pluto, the planet of crisis and separation, is passing right like in your 7th house, which is the house that is connected to relationships. That might mean that if you are in a relationship, you might go through a crisis together, or you might if you're married, you might decide to divorce, or something might happen that might shake up a little bit things. And not to say that there are like negative things that happen, but there are some things that can be challenging. So one example of that is what is happening right now in the world and in the sky. And this is very like hot news actually, because some of like the best astrologers are just starting to talk about this. So this is like very new, and there is this specific asteroid that was actually discovered in 1980. It was discovered in China in one of the bases that they have for research there. And they discovered that asteroid and named it Wuhan. And that's really interesting, right? Because if you think about what is happening today, the astrologers started to track the movement of that asteroid in connection to what is happening. And these best astrologers noticed that the very trajectory of this asteroid is very connected to all the main events of the COVID-19. So in one way, it would be connected or representing the whole archetype or the whole connection with coronavirus. And that is, whoa, mind blowing. My God, there is an asteroid that is bringing all this coronavirus thing happening. So it's a very new thing, because also a very traditional astrologers, sometimes they only work with the planets. They don't work with asteroids. But the modern ones consider asteroids as well. So the ones that actually consider the asteroids are starting to observe it and notice how much everything is very aligned. Like the day that coronavirus was kind of announced, or the day that the first case happened or was discovered in China, the day of the shutdown of China, the day of the first death, the day that things started to spread around the world, and the sign that was actually representing this expansion. For example, there's the asteroid Wuhan was in the very end of Sagittarius when it just like came out. And the idea of Sagittarius is about expansion. It's that idea of fire that once it gets you, it kind of like burns everything, and it really expands really quickly. And sometimes it can be a good thing, especially if you're talking about knowledge, right? If you're actually expanding knowledge, then everyone learns a lot very rapidly. But if you're talking about an illness, this is not that good, right? So this is exactly what happened. And whenever a planet or an asteroid is at the very degree, at the very end of a degree, because each sign has 30 degrees of space in the sky. So the planet kind of like, you know, has this trajectory for all the 30 degrees. And when it reaches the very last degree to start transiting in a different sign, in a different element, that moment is a moment of crisis, because it's when you're stepping out of something to step in something new. And this was the very moment that it was all discovered that this illness was kind of like coming to life in the world. And that is really interesting. So I wanted to bring it up just for you to know how much a lot of this can be very subjective, but sometimes it's really interesting to see, wow, if you really connect all the dates of everything that happened to the trajectory of that very asteroid, it's really hard to not interpret that there is a big connection that there is something there. So if we talk a little bit about this year, right, and the rest of the trajectory of Wuhan through 2020, it means that right now we are in the shutdown and the planet is actually retracting. So from the perspective of the Earth, it's speeding down, kind of like it's not going in the same speed as it was until now. And this is gonna start happening right around March, right around May, between the 27th and the 30th of May. Then the Wuhan asteroid is gonna kind of like put on the brakes a little bit. And that might mean that we're all, and it's easy to interpret that we're all going to come out and the economy is going to come back. We're all going to do the things again because, you know, Wuhan is going to be a little bit like, oh, let me just rest a little bit. But it's going to come back to the full speed another time this year, and this is going to be right around September. And when that happens, a lot of the other planets are also going to be having a difference in speed and going in a certain kind of different direction. And that might mean that we might have a second wave hitting us right around that time, and it's all going to come back. The good thing is that there are other asteroids that actually represent healing, that they are like transiting together. So maybe the reason why the world is not bad yet is because there are so many energies of healing and so many possibilities of discovering ways of continuing life that are just transiting together. And one of these asteroids is actually connected to Pallas Athena, which is one of the Greek goddesses. And that asteroid is named Pallas, and is usually connected to healing and to mediation and diplomacy between people of authority, right? So that asteroid is just like behind, and there is a moment of this year that that asteroid is going to go actually forward, and it's going to be transiting a little in front of Wuhan, and that might mean that then we might actually find the vaccine or find something that is actually going to contain the virus. But that's not going to happen until the end of this year. So that's interesting information to start thinking about what is actually happening in the world and just noticing. And maybe if you have total disbelief in astrology, just watch what's going to happen this year, and you might have a different opinion at the end of 2020.
Well, I think this is a great point, and I just want to hit on the fact that it's really interesting because this is such an elaborate system that uses things like trajectories and transits and mathematical equations and, you know, these kinds of things to make meaning and to interpret signs and to see correlations, right, and coincidences and interpret them in these specific ways. So I think that's really fascinating that that the astrological community is kind of so on top of this this particular issue and really looking at ways to kind of think through and think about the future. Because again, as human beings, we really, certainty is something that we seek out, and humans have long looked at the skies to kind of have a sense of certainty. And so this is really interesting that this is correlating with a lot of predictions that people are using other forms of knowledge for, like, you know, scientific mapping and epidemiology and things like that. So it's very interesting how it happens to be kind of lining up in this particular way.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And this is a very new thing too. So just now, astrologers are connecting that very asteroid, which is a pretty new asteroid, to what is actually happening in the world. If we think about the future, it might be that the asteroid is always going to be representing something about like some sort of illness that kind of affects the collective. And it might not necessarily be just the coronavirus at this moment that is, but that is gonna like kind of shape probably what's gonna be happening in astrology from here on.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, like a whole new symbol is basically being created.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's so interesting. I was like, my mind was blowing when I figured out that actually the asteroid was named Wuhan, and this is where the first case came from, right? Wow. You can't actually say that this is like made up, because if the asteroid was named like this right now, they need to say, oh, that's a stretch, right? But no, it was already there. So I'd like to just, like, in the light of all of that, remember of like one quote of this astrologer called Rick Levine, that he says that fate is what happens to us and free will is how we respond. So a lot of times we might get caught up into thinking that astrology is actually just portraying like a fate that is unchangeable, but it always works also with the idea of free will. And doesn't mean that you're going to change completely who you are, but the more you know about who you are, you get more choices in how you respond to your own life. And then you can actually transform things through that, right? We can't actually stop COVID-19 from spreading, but we can definitely choose how we're responding to that. And that's going to say what's going to happen in the future, right? How is the world going to be from here on, based on how we choose to use our free will at this moment. So there is a part of that, there is our fate to go through that together. But how we're going to do that, this is our own choice. And that's something very important to remember. So if you're curious to know more about astrology, there are two things that I recommend. One is having an astrology app in your phone that can really help you track what is happening in the sky. And it doesn't like have to be very complicated. You don't have to know all the planets and everything. One thing that I recommend usually is to track the movement of the moon, because the moon is one of the most quick asteroids in the sky that is kind of like bringing information on a daily basis for you to start learning about it. So every 2.5 days, the moon is in a different sign. So for example, today, the moon is in Taurus, and I'm gonna talk a little more about it. But if you notice, when the moon is in Taurus, what does happen in your life? How do you feel? What are the emotions around you? What do you actually feel like a desire to do? How your dreams are going? How your connections in your relationships are unfolding during that time. And if you start noticing that, you're going to understand a little deeper about the energy of each of the signs and the energy of the planets, starting by the moon. So usually that's why I use this app. I use this one called Astrovisor because it's very easy. And you can go and just track if you see the symbol of the moon there. It's saying right now here, this picture is just saying 24, which is 24 degrees. And then there is the symbol that like looks like two waves. And this is the symbol of Aquarius. So the moment that I took that image or that picture or that screenshot from my phone, the moon was in Aquarius. And I was observing what that was representing in my life. And another way also to learn more is to go to the suggested websites, because the good thing about having a lot of information free online is that you have a lot of information, but also how to discern, right? What types of websites are actually accurate, are actually giving, you know, very solid information. And this is one of them that you can totally trust, is astro.com. And you can find a lot of things there. You can see your chart, your birth chart. You can read a little bit about the planets. There is all kinds of information that you can get there for free. Also, you can pay for things, but there is a lot of information for free there that I totally recommend. Next slide. So on this note, if you are a curious beginner, I'll say go for Google, read everything you can, but don't just rely on that. Go and read the books. Try to know what are the main authors, the main astrologers, the most famous one in history or right now. Go for them, try to read them. Maybe take classes. Nowadays, there's so many online classes that you can take. And also go have your chart read, because this is one of the quickest way of understanding astrology better. Because then you're gonna understand in practice how it feels to receive all that information and how you can interpret that for yourself in your own life. And that's like the best start. Some people actually, that's how they learn. They go to different astrologers and they have their chart read in many 20 astrologers, and this is how they learn. So I recommend also reading books and going, you know, for the published materials. But this is a very interesting way of learning through practice. And do some networking, because another way that astrologers really learn is by discussion, by discussing, like, for example, right now, this discovery of the asteroid Wuhan being connected to coronavirus was actually happening because of many discussions of different astrologers observing the orbit and the trajectory of the asteroid and sharing information and then piecing things together to come up with like a connection. And there are many Facebook groups, and everyone is always like posting with a lot of like information and a lot of different forms of data and knowledge there. So I recommend participating in different groups and different communities. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So now going towards the end of our talk today, I'm just gonna mention about the moon of the day so we can practice a little bit and have an experiential at home to feel ourselves and try to embody a little bit of this teachings. So today the moon is in Taurus, like I mentioned before. In the domain of Taurus, or the general idea behind Taurus, revolves around the inner and outer resources that we have, a constant effort to maintain basic needs met, and to be practical and realistic with material affairs. Usually a Taurus person revels in stability and comfort. There is an effort in preserving values. There is a need for groundedness. There might be the slow movers, and they are usually considered patient and reliable. So when the moon is in Taurus, even though you are not Taurus, you might feel a little more kind of connected to a little more patience. You're feeling a little more grounded. And what is really interesting this week is that when the moon entered Taurus, which was actually the new moon on Wednesday, I think it was either Wednesday or Thursday, it was the Earth Day, which was very interesting because there was like a big connection between the two things. And if you can just like wake up and notice how you're feeling in that day, you might just feel like you're feeling like, I just want to, you know, have a little bit of ice cream and stare at the stars and be cool with myself today. I want to take it easy, you know. Even though you might be a Gemini who is always like all over the place, wanting to talk with everyone, you might feel a little different that day, a little slower, right? And that could be connected to the moon Taurus idea. So today, actually, well, everyone is gonna watch this in a different time, but today, Friday morning, the moon is actually going to the end of Taurus. So we are kind of like preparing to say goodbye to that energy and getting ready to enter the energy of Aries, which is very different and very opposite of that, which is a very fiery energy, wanting to be very active out there in the world instead of like protecting one's own comfortability. But we're not there yet. Saturday we will be. So if you're watching this during the weekend, that is the energy. The moon is probably in Aries and you might be feeling like you want to be active or you want to have like new ideas, and you might have a short attention span and kind of go from one thing to another. Okay, so we can go to the next. So yeah, one more time, just showing the energy of Taurus. If you actually want to know if you are Taurus or not, then you look at your birth date. So if you were born between April 20th and May 20th, that means that you are Taurus. And these are some of the connections. So there is a planet that is very connected to Taurus in a way that it's like its ruler. It actually contains the general idea of what Taurus means. And this is the planet Venus. And the element is Earth. And it's also connected to the house that is called the second house of the chart, because that house talks about the inner resources, the possessions, like the material stability. So those are just like quick facts. Next, please. So yeah, and every sign has a connection to a myth. So if we bring mythology to that, so Taurus is going to be connected to the mythology of the Minotaur. So the Minotaur was this beast that was actually born from the union of a queen and a beast. And then he was born part man and part bull. And he would dwell at the center of the labyrinth in Crete. And the story behind it is that there was this hero, of course, that had to go through several challenges and sacrifices to then actually overcome them and slay the beast And through that, he was actually is laying also the secret behind how that beast was born, because actually the queen was, I forgot who she was married with. It was a king that I forgot the name, but she fell in love with this bull, and she mated with the bull, and this is how the Minotaur was born. So there was this secret behind this very like sensual pleasure that the queen had, and this excitement about the bull, and that was like very weird for those times. Something that couldn't happen. You couldn't actually let yourself fall into the pleasures of the sensual world. And the idea behind actually the hero kind of being able to overcome a lot of challenges and then liberating the beast through killing it was actually liberating the possibility of relating to the sensual world in a new level of understanding. And sometimes I like to connect some poetry with the general idea of the myth. And here there's this one, there's a part of one poem of Mary Elizabeth Coleridge that says, "Mother of God, no lady, no common woman of common earth, our ladies call thee now. But Christ was never of gentle birth, a common man of the common earth." Because this idea of Taurus is always like bringing things down to earth and to the body. And this is why the actual pleasure that we can feel through our senses really brings us to that center of our body. So this might be a day that you might be wanting to do that for yourself. And if you're not, you can benefit from doing that if you're not actually right there. So next slide. So the offer here is for us to meditate on this mantra connected to the idea of Taurus, which is, I recognize my inner capacities and immense resources. I am myself a treasure. So note that down. So this is how you're gonna do it. So next slide is gonna explain it a little better. The idea is for you to practice some sort of silencing the mind. You're either just taking some deep breaths and closing your eyes, or just like noticing a tree or looking to the sky, just like having your thoughts slowing down a little bit to the point that you can control a little bit, that you're not like all over the place with your thoughts or worries. And through this silence, you're gonna meditate on what Taurus means and on the mantra. And if you say that, I also recommend saying the mantra out loud, like, I am myself a treasure. Does it feel like it's weird to say that? Does it feel like you have no connection to it? Does it make you feel pleasure in saying that? How is that you feel while you say that? Because one thing is to actually read it like this, and another thing is like reading it out loud. It does actually have there is some power in actually hearing your own voice saying something. And after doing that, I recommend that you take some notes and some insights, how it felt to say that, how it was for you to think about and meditate on those ideas. And I even recommend doing that in nature. If you can go outside, if there is a tree that you can just sit by, something, maybe a garden that you have in your house, or maybe just like a very small area that you have a little piece of grass that you can just sit. That can be a good way of like not only helping your mind to silence a little bit, but also to actually feel the resources of the earth, right? And then through that, you find a buddy to have a little discussion and say, how did that feel for you? And to listen to how that felt for the other person too. So maybe someone that you live with, that is around your house during your quarantining, or someone that is also taking this class, you can maybe set up a phone call or a Zoom call and then just discuss this a little bit to actually hear how that can feel different for different people. So this is my suggestion to actually experiment a little bit. And if you are also watching this when you know that the moon is in Aries or the moon is in a different sign, you can always try to meditate on that very sign that the moon is on the day that you're doing the practice. Yeah, and again, the discussion with other people, I think, is very powerful. So I would recommend to do the full thing, your own reflection individually, but also sharing, because you can always have a different perspective on that general idea. And I love to think about this quote that is, a shifting perspective opens new channels of information. And that image kind of shows a little bit how it's possible. Yeah, especially in our brains. So usually other people help us to shift perspective. It's kind of harder to do that just ourselves alone. Yeah, I guess that's it. Let me see. Oh, yeah, the next slide is just my contact. If you had any doubts or any curiosity or any reflection or just things that you want to share with me, please feel free to reach out. My email is adrianabeltrame@gmail.com. And here's my phone. Feel free to reach out and I'll be more than happy to respond. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Adriana. So I just want to say thank you so much. And again, I think it's just really important to reiterate that, you know, this is just one way of kind of making sense of who you are, where you are in the world, where the world is. It can be an explanatory model. It can be something to do for fun at a party. There's a lot of different ways, but it is a very interesting kind of system that has had a really big impact on culture in the past and continues to in the present. So thanks to, you know, being someone who's in this kind of subculture, it's really awesome to have this opportunity to explore it more deeply. So thanks again, Adriana, and feel free to reach out. She is very friendly if you have any questions.